So I'm thrilled to be here tonight to talk about the way, as Mr. Brennan said. It is, well, that's one of the themes we'll be talking about. I just wanted to alert you, my good friend and colleague, our parishioner at Notre Dame, where I am, trustee, parish trustee, has been filming my sermons and presentations, and so she's going to be doing that during this. We won't film them more. Tonight I'll be asking questions of each one of you. We will turn off the camera for that. But I hope you won't mind that recording what we're talking about. So I'm just going to give kind of a teaser tonight, lay out a couple of things, a couple of themes, which we'll explore more in depth tomorrow. And then I'm going to ask each of you, if you wish, going around in a minute or two, that is for a minute or two each one, just to let me know why you came on this retreat, and/or what specific issue or question might particularly be interesting you, if not troubling you, at least fascinating you on this question of Buddha and Christ. And if you want to pass, you can pass, but it will give me a better sense of where each one of you is coming from, because in a group like this, especially one this large, and on a topic like this, it's very hard to know where everyone's coming from. I mean, it happens all the time when I preach in church. You don't know where everyone is. But here we do have the space and the time and the opportunity to share a little bit more personally, so that I can make sure I cover in my presentation tomorrow what particularly will interest you. That would be helpful. So I thought I would start tonight, I said, with just kind of a teaser. I was already with the title of the talk, which is Buddha and Christ. I originally suggested Buddha and Christ relatives, ? But they thought that maybe people would take that too literally. Not blood relatives, as far as I know. But so we just said Buddha and Christ in conversation, and I asked Brandon to put a colon in there, so that it can be Buddha and Christ, colon, in conversation, so that could mean in conversation is us with them. With each of them and with them together. We are the ones in conversation with the two of them, if they are two. That'll be one of the questions. And also, obviously, colon in conversation, the two of them in conversation. We won't try and imagine some ahistorical conversation, but we can look at their teaching, their lives, and their followers. Buddhists and Christians in conversation, and see what we come up with. So that's the first thing. In terms of church understanding and practice, the relationship of Christianity with quotes, other religions, has been problematic and tricky. Still is in many ways. That's why we can profit from a time like this. One of the participants here was telling me at dinner that one of the pictures he loves is a picture of the Dalai Lama and Mother Teresa, bowing and facing, forehead to forehead, to each other. But and it is. That's beautiful, and that's I hope a good symbol of where we're going. But it can mean a lot of different things. I mean, in itself. I can guess what it actually does mean, considering who they both are. But, in itself, a Buddhist and a Christian actually smiling at each other can mean lots of things. Some of you I know have read Paul Knitter, a good friend of mine, and a great interreligious theologian, and I'll be referring to him throughout these sessions. But his Introducing Theologies of Religion was a really basic textbook a good record of what the interaction, the mutual understanding or misunderstanding has been in the past and where it's going now, is a really wonderful text. And what I especially respect about it, in its very detailed analysis of the different approaches to how these can interact, is its objectivity. It's quite amazing that I couldn't detect in this book of his, as he presents the different approaches, where he stood. And I know later where he stood. But it's interesting that if you just want a very objective presentation of what the different approaches have been, go to that book, Introducing Theologies of Religions. And you'll see very unbiased, positives, negatives of all the different approaches right there, and it can help you perhaps find your way. But I do want to start with some basic things because the first question I always get when people hear that I'm a Catholic priest and a Zen sensei is, how can you combine those two? It's always the same question, and so people are starting from a very basic level. And I know, thanks to me, thanks to the Spirit and to life and everything, that I'm in my own life now so far beyond that question. I mean, there's just no conflict or problem at all in my own life. But I realize that people have to be reached where they are and in their own stage of integration or lack of it. So we want to start with some basic themes. So the basic approaches that Paul Knitter presents, and you can maybe situate where you have been in the past or where you may be now, are the four. The one was with the basic view of what seemed to be the basic view of throughout much of church history, that all of the religions, there was only one true religion, which was Christianity, and all the others were going to be replaced. As soon as you got Christianity, then all the other stuff, which wasn't very helpful, and maybe even dangerous, would be replaced by Christianity. That's the replacement model, as he calls it. And that was really popular among many. Made probably the dominant view for many centuries. It was, people believed that people could be saved, by what they called baptism of desire and such things, maybe, but it was really a replacement model. It was not until Vatican II, really, that you started getting, in the decree in Nostra Aetate on non-Christian religions, which was primarily dedicated to Judaism, but also had a few lines in the beginning about these Eastern religions, as well as Islam, of course, where it said there's actually something positive about these religions. And all the misunderstandings, and there were so many misunderstandings when Buddhism was first studied by scholars and literary people in the 19th century from the West, almost nobody got it right. I remember reading a history of the church when I was in the monastery that was written, in the 50s, and still they totally misunderstood Buddhism. So there was really just complete misinformation about what it meant, what was going on. Schopenhauer didn't get it right, in other words. Okay, so we really have to look at it. When we do, then we discover, as the Vatican Council did, many positive things about for example, Eastern religions like Buddhism. And so people like Karl Rahner, put forth what might be called the second fulfillment model. Whereas these beautiful things that can be very helpful in leading you a certain way, find their fulfillment, their ultimate realization in Christianity. And Karl Rahner developed the whole theology and theological anthropology, whereby everything in the human person was built for Christianity and finds its fulfillment also in Christianity. So not just institutions or the heritage, the cultural and religious heritage of humanity, but each individual person finds fulfillment in Christ and Christianity. The third one, which has been becoming more modern now, is the mutuality theory. Whereas there are many true religions in dialogue with each other, embracing and understanding one Now be careful what we mean by true religion. A true religion doesn't mean the one true religion. There can't be more than one true, if that's even the right way to say it. But if you say there are many true religions in the sense that they can be vehicles of, what would you say? Should we use Christian terminology, salvation, redemption, or should we say enlightenment, fulfillment, the realization of the human being, realization of our destiny, eternally or beyond, anything like that, that they can actually serve that. And as such, therefore, since they can be valid paths, they are in mutual dialogue to see how they can nourish each other, or challenge each other, or illuminate each other. And this is my view, and this is Paul Nitter's view. If you want to read his book, Without Buddha I Could Not Be Christian, which shows you how they are in mutual dialogue, working within one person and in themselves, if you like, in the theological discourse and spiritual discourse of humanity. So that you can have, as Paul has developed it, what can be called double belonging. You don't just belong to one tradition, you can belong to more than one tradition. It's not going to hurt you, it'll actually help you. And it can, as he says, as he explains in his classes, you belong to a basic tradition that is the one often enough that you were trained in. You're rooted there. Then you identify as that primarily. Maybe worship in that particular community. But you can be, as he said, substantially nourished by another tradition at the same time. I've heard, for example, the Irish theologian Enda McDonough, who was the moral theologian in the Irish seminary in Maynooth for many years. He actually gave a talk once. He said, within Christianity itself, he says, you can have, should have, he said. It never really became a popular view, I don't think, but he said you should have double belonging there too. If you're a Catholic, you should be able to go to the Anglican Church and the Methodist Church and have be nourished by that as well. We should make a big deal out of that. Well, maybe that's not more radical than maybe it's not less radical than saying you can belong to two different traditions in that sense, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity, etc. The fourth model is what he calls the acceptance model, which means there are all these different religions, and never the many will meet, and you just have to bear with it, put up with it. They'll never really understand each other or find much common ground. That's just the way things are. Hope that's not true, but that would be the other extreme. So that's the basic landscape that we're dealing with, theologically and ecclesiologically. What we're going to be focusing on, as I said, we attend more to that third view. We're going to see how that can work, why it does work, why it has worked in the lives of many. And the real key, I believe, and many others, like my old friend Francis Xavier Clooney, who's now at Hartford in the comparative religion, we believe, and this goes all the way back also to people like Thomas Merton, and Chogyam Trungpa, who was the founder of the Tibetan lineage here in the U.S. But the real place, the most effective place, and the most lasting place, and the most profound place where the traditions can meet fruitfully is in religious experience. If you just have religious dialogue, which is on the conceptual level, my worldview is better than your worldview, and because you've got these conflicting concepts, the worldviews are conflicting, and you can't resolve them because you stay on the level of concepts which by nature are conflicting. So that's why, important as it is, that kind of philosophical comparison and debate has its place, but it's not going to get you very far. What can get you further, I think, is proving itself to be so, is on the level of contemplative experience. So, I never got a doctorate in theology, but I was not only a priest, but I was a Catholic monk on a hillside for 22 years. I think I know a little bit about experience. And I never got a doctorate in Buddhist studies, but I, became a sensei, in terms of passing on the Dharma lineage, in terms of practice. So I'm definitely not an academic. I'm speaking, for what it's worth, from practice and from experience. So one more thing before I open it up to getting where you are a little bit. To go, as I said, to go back to basics. I said earlier that there's so much fundamental misunderstanding of what the traditions say. And by the way, I don't just mean that Christians don't understand Buddhists and Buddhists don't understand Christians, which is true very often. Christians don't understand Christians. I mean, I think there's a very superficial sometimes understanding of our own tradition among many people. Not that it's not their fault. It's that they were poorly taught and taught bad, unhelpful things, which I believe is the main reason people have run away from the church. Not to mention that sometimes nasty people who taught them these things to begin with, who probably got nasty because they were teaching the wrong things and they were themselves deformed. So that was my experience. So it's important, and by the way, we'll see that it's precisely other traditions shedding new light on our own tradition, which can help us regain what our own tradition actually says, and where it points, and what its depth is, and what its beauty is. And we'll see, hopefully, a good deal of that tomorrow. But I say one of the most basic misunderstandings that you get in terms of Christians understanding Buddhism is one of two extremes. They worship Buddha as a god and therefore an idol. Or Buddhism is atheistic and nihilistic. The two opposites. And they're both wrong, of course. So just to make that clear, first of all, Buddha is not worshipped as a god, and then because they don't talk about God at all. But Buddha never claimed to be anything. He didn't claim to be God or a prophet of God. He didn't use those words. He didn't use those concepts. He simply claimed to be, well, he didn't even claim to be. He was dubbed, once he achieved this enlightenment, he was dubbed the one who had woken up. He woke up to what? Well, to it. What's it? Find out. It is what reality is, who you are, what the universe is, and what the connections are among all those things. So he was, in Christian terms, a saint, let's call him that. One who had reached the fullness of his potential in relation to the absolute mystery of the universe. That was my impression when, for example, when I took my first trip to the Far East, to Bangkok and Hong Kong and elsewhere in 2005. So overwhelmed by the images of the Buddha, but also comparing the way people treated the Buddha and comparing it to the Cathedral of the Assumption in Bangkok, the old French cathedral there, with Mary up there. I said, it's kind of similar, isn't it? Mary is not God, yet she's very powerful and closely united to God, and pours her grace upon the world. And that's the way most of these, simple Buddhists were treating the Buddha as someone who was really awake and a magnificent personage who was closely united to the ultimate mystery of the universe, who was able to pour forth graces upon them. That needs to be nuanced a lot, even for Buddhists. Not all Buddhists treat Buddha that way. But it did make clear to me that, if you want to call Shakyamuni Buddha, the actual historical Buddha, anything, call him a saint. Now, are you worshipping a false god? As some Christians think you are, but are you worshipping a false god if you pray to a saint or venerate a saint or the angels? Well, no. Or Mary. Mary is no more an obstacle to the ultimate reality than Buddha is to the ultimate reality, and any of these are simply channels to help us there. We'll talk more about that. And then I say this will be nuanced more tomorrow. But the other extreme is that Buddhism is nihilistic, and that came through in the history of the church I was reading at the time. He's saying all these Buddhist priests sitting around meditating, there is nothing. Yeah, well, what do they mean by that? And if you knew a little bit more about what it meant, you might be happier yourself. Nothing. Emptiness. So that's why they think about emptiness or nirvana or enlightenment, etc., but they never, won't speak about God, but they don't speak about it. And some do, by the way. Even some Asian masters aren't afraid to use the God once it's purged of all the projections we have on it. The God we worship is mostly a God that we project. Certainly the white man sitting on the throne with a beard, directing the universe from some up there high up on the 7th or 8th or 9th heaven up there. That's this pure projection, as we know now. It's only from astronomy. We know that's not the case. So some of it, as Freud said quite well, it can just be a parental projection, which we have out there. So Buddhism, way before Freud and Western psychology, was aware of the fact that insofar, and to the extent that, and as soon as we conceptualize God or imagine God, we run the risk of worshiping an idol, because God is, Catholic theology has always said, infinite, way beyond all of that. So Buddhists just refuse to talk about anything like that, because as soon as you name it, you defile it. That's very smart. Like Paul Tillich said, there should be a 100-year moratorium on the word God, because we don't know what we're talking about. And more interestingly, we'll never know what we're talking about. So be very careful with using words like that. So to say Buddhism is atheistic misses the point entirely, because Buddhism is certainly in contact with the ultimate mystery of the universe, whatever you want to call it. And that's just another phrase, which we're probably projecting ourselves onto as well. So you can't win unless you're silent. Which is what we're going to be doing also. This is a retreat, not just a lecture. We'll be doing some practice. And obviously not nihilistic either, not atheistic but not nihilistic, because emptiness is fullness, when you experience it that way. You just don't name it. Because if you call it fullness, then you have an image already. What's fullness of what? Of course, if you have name emptiness, you have an image there too, so you've got to be careful of that, as the Buddhists say themselves. Empty emptiness, they say. Empty emptiness. Because that's just another word that's going to get in your way. All right, so I think that's enough to set the stage for tonight. I really would like, in the time we have about 45 minutes, maybe an hour. We're going to be even longer upstairs, so if I need an excuse. So I just suggest that if you follow along, and just so I can get an idea, we can get an idea of one another too, for your sake as well, of where you're coming from. So I said, why you're interested in this retreat this weekend, and/or what specific thing may be troubling you or fascinating you that you'd like to see covered or discussed during this. And remember, since we have 30 or so people, it comes to about 90 seconds. So this is just to give a little indication, all right?